I thought I was the kind of person things didn't happen to. Not the dramatic things. Not the life-changing, floor-dropping, out-from-under-you things. I was 32, a nurse practitioner at St. Clair's Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, and my life ran on a schedule. Up at 5:45, coffee before shoes, charting done before the next shift arrived. I had a system. I had control. I had earned both of those things after the 2 worst years of my life, and I was not letting go of either one. My name is Sarah. And on a Tuesday in March, my phone rang at 2:17 in the afternoon, and nothing about my life was ever the same again. I was in the break room eating a sandwich I didn't want when my cell buzzed on the table. Unknown number, Columbus area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I have no idea why I didn't. Is this Sarah Calloway? It is. Who's calling? This is Brenda Marsh. I'm the patient liaison at Riverside Children's Hospital. Ms. Calloway, I'm calling because we have a child here, a little girl, 6 years old. Her name is Emma. She was brought in this morning after a fall at her school. She has a mild concussion, nothing life-threatening, but she's been here for over 4 hours now, and we haven't been able to reach anyone. A pause. You're listed as her emergency contact. Her only emergency contact. I set down my sandwich. I'm sorry, I said. I think there's been a mistake. Is this Sarah Calloway? Date of birth: June 14th, 1992, previously residing at 4418 Birchwood Drive. That was my old address, the house my ex-husband and I had shared. Yes, I said slowly. That's me. But I don't have a daughter. I don't have any children. Silence on the other end. Ms. Calloway, the woman said carefully. The child's file lists you as her legal guardian. I drove to Riverside Children's Hospital in a state I can only describe as controlled panic. I was a medical professional. I did not speed. I did not run red lights. But my hands were at 10 and 2 the entire way, and I said absolutely nothing to myself out loud, because I was afraid of what would come out. I had been divorced for 3 years. My ex-husband's name was Marcus Webb. We had been married for 4 years, and together for 2 before that. And when it ended badly, the quiet, corrosive kind of badly that leaves no bruises but takes something from you all the same. We had tried to have children. Once, 2 years into our marriage, we had done 1 round of IVF. It had failed. We had 2 frozen embryos remaining. When we filed for divorce, I had signed what my lawyer told me was a standard release of claim on all jointly held medical assets. I had not read every page. I had been 30 years old and heartbroken, and I just wanted it to be over. I had not thought about those embryos in 3 years. I want you to hold that. I want you to hold exactly how naive I was. The children's ward at Riverside smelled like disinfectant and apple juice. A nurse led me down a hallway with cartoon animals painted along the bottom of the walls. Giraffes and elephants in primary colors, cheerful and absurd. She stopped outside a room and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She's been asking for you, the nurse said. She doesn't know me, I said. The nurse looked at me a moment longer, then pushed the door open. The little girl in the bed was small for 6. Dark hair, pulled into 2 uneven pigtails the way a child does it herself, because no adult was there to help. She had a bandage above her left eyebrow and a bruise beginning to purple along her cheekbone, and she was sitting up in the hospital bed with a stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest, watching the door like she had been watching it for a very long time. When she saw me, something in her face changed. You look like my picture, she said. I stepped into the room. My legs were operating on their own. What picture? She reached under the pillow and pulled out a photograph, the edges soft with handling. She held it out to me. I took it. It was me. Younger, maybe 26 or 27, before the IVF. Before the divorce. I was standing in a garden somewhere, laughing at something outside the frame. My hair longer than I wore it now. I had no memory of this photo being taken. But it was me. Unmistakably, completely me. Daddy said, "Your name is Sarah," the little girl said. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should find you. Where is your daddy? I asked. My voice came out softer than I expected. Her face did something complicated. He didn't come home last night, Miss Mara said. Ortega at school said that's why she called. He always picks me up. She clutched the rabbit tighter. He never doesn't pick me up. I sat down in the chair beside her bed. I did not know what I was doing. I did not know who this child was, or how she existed, or what Marcus had done. But she was 6 years old, and she had a concussion, and she had been alone in a hospital room for 4 hours watching a door, and she had a photograph of me under her pillow. "What's your rabbit's name?" I asked. She looked down at it. "Biscuit." "That's a good name," I said. "I'm Sarah. Can I stay with you for a little while?" She nodded, very seriously, like we had made a formal agreement. I stayed. I called into the hospital and said I had a family emergency. I sat with Emma until she fell asleep, which took 40 minutes and involved 3 cups of apple juice and a lengthy explanation of why Biscuit's left eye was different from his right eye. Then I walked to the nurse's station and asked to speak with the patient liaison and the social worker on duty. And I sat in a small office with fluorescent lighting and a box of tissues on the table, and I asked them to tell me everything they knew. What they knew was not much. Emma had been enrolled at Lincoln Elementary under the last name Webb. Her father was listed as Marcus Webb. There was a home address, an apartment I didn't recognize on the east side of Columbus. No mother listed on any form. Emergency contact, Sarah Calloway, with my cell number and my old Birchwood Drive address. That was it. That was the whole file. Marcus had not been found. I drove home that night in the dark, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I did not sleep. The next morning, I called my divorce attorney. Her name was Diane Cho, and she had represented me through the entire dissolution, and she was the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words. When I explained what had happened, she was quiet for a long moment. "The embryo release form," she said. "Yes." "Sarah, that form was a relinquishment of your claim. It was not an authorization for use. There's a significant legal difference. I understand that. But someone used them. There is a 6-year-old child." Another silence. "I need to see the full IVF clinic records," she said. "I need to see what consent forms exist and what signatures are on them." "Can you get me the name of the clinic?" I could. I had buried it, but I could. "I'll also need you to be prepared," she said, "for the possibility that there are documents with your signature on them that you did not knowingly sign." I had already considered this. I had considered it at 2 in the morning with my 3rd cup of tea going cold on the table in front of me. I had considered exactly how many pages had been in that divorce settlement packet and how many of them I had actually read word by word and how many I had simply signed where my attorney at the time, Marcus's friend, I realized now, who had technically been listed as a mediator, had placed the little colored flag tabs. "I know," I said. "It took Diane 11 days to get the clinic records. 11 days, during which Emma remained at Riverside, cleared medically, but held pending resolution of her guardianship situation, and during which I visited her every single day. I don't know how to explain what those 11 days were, except to say that they were not what I expected. I expected to feel invaded. I expected to feel used. I did feel both of those things. There were nights I sat in my car in the Riverside parking garage and felt a fury so cold and complete it frightened me. Marcus had done something unforgivable. He had taken something from my body without my real consent. He had built a life around a lie and then, apparently, disappeared and left a 6-year-old child to hold the pieces. But Emma was not the lie. Emma was just a little girl who didn't know where her father was and who had, for reasons I didn't yet fully understand, grown up with a photograph of me under her pillow. On the 4th day, she asked me to read to her. On the 6th day, she told me Biscuit's full name was actually Sir Reginald Biscuit III, and that he was a knight, and that his job was to protect her while she slept. On the 8th day, she asked me, very quietly and without looking up from the puzzle we were doing together, whether I was going to leave. "I'm coming back tomorrow," I said. "But after," she said. "After I go somewhere else." I looked at her bent head. Those uneven pigtails. "Let's do the puzzle," I said, because I didn't yet have an honest answer, and I would not lie to her. On the 11th day, Diane called me. The clinic record showed 2 consent forms. One bore my signature on the standard embryo storage continuation form, legitimate, from the original IVF process. The second was a consent for single-parent use of stored embryos in the event of relationship dissolution. It also bore my signature, except that Diane had sent it to a forensic document examiner and the conclusion was unambiguous. The signature had been traced. Someone had taken my original signature and reproduced it. Marcus had forged my consent. He had used a surrogate, a woman named Janet Reyes, who had been paid through a private arrangement and who had, legally, signed away all parental rights at birth. Emma had been born with my genetic material and Marcus's. She was, biologically, my daughter. And Marcus had registered her birth, raised her for 6 years, listed me as her emergency contact, kept my photograph for her, and then vanished. A detective named Phil Okafor was assigned to the case. They found Marcus 4 days later. He was in a hospital in Cincinnati, had been since the night before Emma's fall, admitted under a different name following a car accident on I-71. He had a traumatic brain injury. He was not conscious. The prognosis was uncertain. I sat in Diane's office after she told me this, and I tried to feel one clean emotion and could not. He had stolen from me in a way the law was only beginning to find language for. He had made a decision about my body and my future without asking me. He had done it secretly, carefully, and with enough legal scaffolding that it had held for 6 years. And then he had been taken out by a patch of black ice on an interstate in the middle of the night, and his 6-year-old daughter had waited alone in a hospital bed and held a photograph of a woman she had never met. I thought about Emma asking me if I was going to leave. I thought about Sir Reginald Biscuit III and his sacred duty. I called the social worker at Riverside. "I want to apply for emergency guardianship," I said. "Tell me what I need to do." It was not fast. Nothing about it was fast. There was a home study and background checks and court dates and a guardian ad litem appointed for Emma and more paperwork than I thought could exist in the world. Diane filed a civil action against Marcus's estate related to the fraudulent consent. The IVF clinic's liability was under separate investigation. My own hospital gave me a leave of absence, and then, when I explained everything, my department head sat across from me and said simply, "Do what you need to do. Your job will be here." Emma came to stay with me on a Thursday in April, 6 weeks after the phone call in the break room. She stood in my front hallway with a plastic bag of belongings and biscuit tucked under one arm, and she looked around at my house very seriously, the way she looked at everything seriously, like she was cataloging it. "It smells like lemons," she said. "I cleaned this morning," I said. "My dad's apartment smelled like coffee," she said. Not sadly, exactly. Just as a fact. Something she was filing away. "Do you want to see your room?" I asked. She looked up at me. "It's my room." "I thought you could pick the color," I said. "If you want." She thought about this for a moment with great seriousness. "Purple," she said, "but not baby purple. Real purple." "Real purple," I agreed. She nodded, satisfied, and walked further into the house. There are things I didn't expect. I didn't expect how much I would grieve while simultaneously feeling something that had no name I'd known before. I didn't expect how often I would stand in the doorway of Emma's room at night, watching her sleep, and feel rage and tenderness in the same breath. Rage at Marcus, at the situation, at the version of myself who signed papers without reading them, and tenderness at the small, specific person who had existed without my knowledge and was now, undeniably, mine. I didn't expect how many ordinary moments would undo me. The first time she reached for my hand in a parking lot, automatic, like it was something she'd always done. The first time she was sick, just a cold, nothing serious, and she called for me in the night, and I was there before I was fully awake. The first time she laughed so hard at something, I said that apple juice came out of her nose, and we were both laughing, and I was also, quietly, crying, and she didn't notice. I didn't expect her to be funny. I don't know why. She was very funny. She had opinions about everything and stated them with complete confidence. She thought escalators were the best invention in human history. She believed that clouds were sky furniture. She informed me once, at breakfast, very gravely, that Biscuit had told her that I needed to buy a plant because the house had not enough nature. And when I pointed out that Biscuit couldn't talk, she gave me a look of profound pity and said, "He talks to me." Marcus remained in the hospital in Cincinnati. He regained some consciousness over those months, but the damage was significant. He would not be raising Emma. I saw him once, just once, with Diane and the court-appointed mediator, and it was one of the harder things I had ever done. He was smaller than I remembered. He could not speak clearly. His sister sat beside him and looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between shame and defiance, and I looked back at her and felt nothing I needed to say out loud. There were people who asked me how I could keep her, who said they wouldn't be able to look at her without thinking about what he'd done. I understand why they asked, but they hadn't met Emma. They hadn't watched her negotiate very firmly for 5 more minutes before bedtime. They hadn't heard her explain the complete mythology she had invented around a stuffed rabbit. They hadn't had her crawl into their bed at 3 in the morning after a bad dream and fall immediately back to sleep, warm and entirely trusting, while you lay there awake, wondering how it was possible to feel this responsible for another human being. She was not the thing Marcus did to me. She was just Emma. It took almost a year for the guardianship to become permanent. There was a proceeding and a judge and more paperwork, and I sat in a courtroom in my nicest blazer, and Emma sat beside me in a dress she had chosen herself. Purple, obviously. And when the judge said the words that made it final, Emma leaned over and whispered, not quietly at all, "Does this mean you're stuck with me?" The judge heard her. He smiled. "Yeah, Bug," I said. "I'm stuck with you." She considered this. "Good," she said, and took my hand. I think about who I was in that break room before the phone rang. The woman with the system, the woman with the schedule and the control and the very deliberately small life she had built after everything fell apart. I think about how certain I was that I had figured out exactly how much space to take up in the world, how many people to let close, how much to want. I think about that woman and I feel something close to tenderness for her. She was doing the best she could. She just didn't know yet what was coming down the hallway toward her, small and serious, with a rabbit under her arm and a photograph of her under a pillow. I am not the same person. I am noisier, more exhausted, less in control of my schedule, and more myself than I have ever been in my life. My name is Sarah. I have a daughter named Emma, who is 7 years old, who believes escalators are a miracle and clouds are furniture, and that her rabbit is a knight of some distinction. Someone tried to take a choice from me, and then, in the way that life sometimes does its most complicated work, the very thing I never chose turned out to be the thing I would choose, again and again, every single day, without hesitation. Her name is Emma. She picked purple, real purple, and she is mine.